We good to go, Cam? Okay. So, I want to do a quick review. We've covered actually a lot of material, and tendency is to say, wow, I forgot about that, because it's kind of like drinking from a fire hydrant. So I want to go back through some of the bullet points from weeks past. And really, here's what will solve everybody's problem. It's really simple. You know, you can spend years in counseling. All we really have to do is speak the truth in love, listen to the truth in love. Make it even simpler. Listen. We can just speak and listen, but just listen to each other is really what it comes down to. Isn't that simple? So, speak the truth in love, listen to the truth in love. Edwin said he was coming tonight. Should we wait? Nope. Okay. So, quick review. I'm going to run. I want to say this tonight. We have some good golden nuggets. So if you hear anything that's helpful, do not assume you're going to remember it. Write it down. Write it down. Okay. So, quick way of reviewing. Like if there's two things that will solve all the problems, I know I'm being somewhat overly simplistic. Speak the truth in love. Listen to the truth in love. What if your spouse has no interest in this? So the cool thing about boundaries in marriage is you have the opportunity to live these principles out, even if it's one-sided or begins that way. So in order for boundaries to have its intended effect, we have to do it correctly. So ownership and responsibility. Here's the lie. Here's the lie. If it were not for you, I would be a more loving, responsible person. Isn't that so good? I mean, we can just close the book and go home. That's so good. In other words, it's your fault that I'm unloving and irresponsible. I can just put it on you. The problem with that is partners think they can explain why the relationship lacks intimacy by the presence of the problem. They are surprised to find that even when the problem goes away, the person with whom they can't connect or find love remains. So you get the immediate problem, you blame the person, but hey, even when the problem goes away, the lack of intimacy remains. In other cases, there may be no problems, but the marriage does not live up to the promise that one or both of the partners had in the beginning. Commitment may be strong, but love, intimacy, and deep sharing are not present. Love, intimacy, and deep sharing are not present. You can be in a marriage where you don't talk to each other. If you're not talking to each other and expressing yourself, you should not expect there to be intimacy. So again, if one of the ways of looking at it is to bring a marriage back together is shared experiences and emotional connection. Emotional connection is I share how I feel on it, and you share how you feel on it, and guess what? We listen to each other. If we'll just do that, seeking to understand, not seeking to correct, seeking to understand where the other person is coming from. Now, what we're going to see tonight is, a lot of times in a marriage, you have the person who's allowed to share their feelings and the person who's not allowed to share their feelings. The person in the marriage who has the right feelings and the person in the marriage who has the wrong feelings. So, again, I'll repeat it. Here's the lie. If it were not for you, I would be a more loving, responsible person. So, it's simply saying, this marriage is bad because of you. As soon as you get your act together, our marriage will be good. That is a trap. Because if you believe that, you may never get out of it. Okay. So rather, we don't need all of our problems to go away before we're able to connect with our spouse. Can I say it again to encourage you? We actually don't need all of our problems to go away before we're able to connect with our spouse. And here's the gold, like I've been trying to say every week. Problem and conflict can either completely destroy you, or it can be an excuse to bond. So, and this is what happens when there's a diagnosis of cancer, a huge loss that is comes into the situation. Some marriages are emerge out of that closer than ever, and some marriages never recover. And the question, really, what is the deciding factor? It's are we able to communicate how we feel and feel seen, known, and understood, each to the other? Because if I can pour out my heart, and if I'm in pain and you're in pain, we're in pain at the same time, the world stops and we listen to each other, we emerge from that encounter feeling encouraged. And where do we view the source of our encouragement coming from? Spouse. So the spouse becomes our haven, our sanctuary, our oasis from the storm of the world. That is super powerful, isn't it? It's beautiful. Welcome, guys. Glad you made it. Welcome. We're doing a quick review. So that's the difference. So I'll say it again. We don't need all of our problems to go away before we're able to connect with our spouse. What we can say is God allowed these problems to come in, and these problems are just a catalyst for my relationship to deepen with my spouse. That can never happen if we're going into the relationship with, you need to think the same way I do. Okay, if we go into the relationship saying, you have to change, the whole thing will be fixed if it's you would just get your act together. So, I'm going to say that a different way in just a moment. How we behave and react is our part of the problem. Okay, so this is really helpful. This is hopeful, because if your spouse has no interest in changing, then it gives, and you may feel like you're a victim. And if you feel like you're a victim, you give away all your responsibility and there's nothing that can be done, and you're in a trap. So if I say, rather, I remove the victim mentality, set that away, throw that away, and I say, rather, how I behave and how I react is my part of the problem. So there's a problem that exists. So there's original problem, let's say, whatever it is. But then secondarily, what for me is primary is how I respond. That's the part I have control over. So what we've been saying in the weeks past is sometimes we're being triggered, we're being flooded, use Gottman's language, and we're putting our response on our spouse, making them responsible for it, when in fact we have to do the work of where are all these feelings of insecurity and fear coming from? Is it merely the spouse? Because is God in control no matter what? So he's hey, how I respond puts me back in the driver's seat. So I love this quote. So what we're saying is we have to take responsibility for our attitudes, feelings, emotions, and behavior. So I try to be very careful in our home with the language of, you made me. You forced me. That language, it's just not helpful. It leads to many cul-de-sacs, dead ends. And it's just in a stalemate. We just can't get through this. So it's wait a minute. Because why is that a stalemate? Why is that a dead end where you can't ever get anywhere? Because you're making someone else responsible for your choices, for your responses, for your reactions. We're going to see more of that. And that's kind of a hard, just so you know, that may seem completely counterintuitive to begin with. So if it's wait, I'm at high RPM in my mind, that's fine. Work through it. It will help set you free. But it does take some work. So you're not alone in that. So here's a quote. Once Joe saw that his anger was his problem and not Caroline's, he took responsibility for it. He learned he was not going to be not angry. He learned that he wasn't going to be not angry because Caroline changed. He was going to be not angry because he grew and responded differently to what she did. He learned not to react, but to think through his choices, to find where his anger and feelings of being threatened by her were coming from. Now, if you can discover that through some self-awareness, what would the next step be? ideally, to be able to calmly communicate it with your spouse. Now, if your spouse is not going to listen, then you can communicate it with God, and that's where a prayer life will lessen your amplitude, so you don't have to walk around on edge. And a lot of times we'll say, I'll just bear it, and that burden, that pressure is bearing down on your soul, and then we erupt onto people with misplaced aggression. But ideally, so last week we drew a few distinctions. We're going to review some in just a moment. We're going to have some more of them tonight, but we used some categories. We said the difference between reacting and responding. Okay? Here's another one, just to park right next to those, in the parking space right next door. Reactivity, and proactivity, being proactive. So we are reactive a lot of times versus being proactive. We're going to talk about it in a moment. Very helpful. So he learned not to react, but to think through his choices to find where his anger and feelings of being threatened by her were coming from. We have to be free. To move on in this review, we have to be free to say no before we are really free to say yes. So what we're going to see tonight is a lot of times in a marriage, there's an active and a passive person. So the active person is the one that's going to dominate. Like, it's somewhat similar to the idea of overfunctioning and underfunctioning. An underfunctioner creates an overfunctioner, an overfunctioner creates an underfunctioner. The idea of, I want to know my spouse. It is way more interesting to understand my spouse than for my spouse to have to echo and parrot my every opinion. I'm telling you, it's way more interesting. So if we back all the way up to God, it is not God the Father, and God the Father. Right? It's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. All right? The economy of the Godhead. And each desiring to serve the other, each is desiring to know the other. Okay, so in order for me to really know my spouse, I have to provide something for my spouse, the opportunity for her to disagree with me. So boundaries is saying, look, they can't really say yes. You say, hey, will you go with me on this journey? They really are not free to say yes unless they're free to say no. Their yes is not meaningful if they can't actually say no. So I was surprised even somewhat recently for my wife to say, I shouldn't have gone. I didn't feel well. I felt pressured to go, and now I'm feeling kind of worse. You remember that? I don't know how long ago that was. It seemed very recent. And I was surprised because I was so excited to spend this time with my wife that I was putting pressure on her, and I wasn't being sensitive enough, and I was really sad for that. I was really glad that she told me that. Moving on. We must see ourselves as free agents God created us to be rather than the victim of our spouse's choices. That's a tough one. And see, all these are all going together. It's so good. We have to see ourselves as free agents God created us to be rather than the victim of our spouse's choices. Here's a quote from the book. He was patient. So this is someone that was being counseled, and this is a wife. And here's her description of how well her husband was loving her. I said it last week. I'll say it again. I love this. He was patient, not reactive. He was strong enough to love me and require more of me at the same time. They loved the other person even when he or she did not deserve it. So the idea of, what does that even look like? So if we lose our tempers, there's no way good communication is going to happen. But the idea of I can stay calm, it's so important if we're going to love our spouse well. We got to watch our amplitude. We want to stay gentle, patient, and kind. If we can stay gentle, patient, and kind, we can say the hardest thing. But you'll never be effective if you're not speaking from love. If you're speaking from frustration, stress, anger, it just doesn't connect. And because, for instance, 80% of the shame that we communicate is through the tone. How do we get the tone right if we're speaking from anger? We could lie to ourselves saying, I'm not angry, I'm fine. Chances are the other person, Cliff.
Sometimes I find myself in some things me and my wife shared with me, it can be amped up, and I have to like put everything on pause for a minute just so I can go back. So I have to say, let's put this on pause, so I can actually be there for it. Because sometimes some things are worth getting upset about. Somebody said something to her that wasn't nice. I instantly want to go back. So I said, okay, you gotta wait here for a minute. Don't act out my emotions that next week.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a tendency to take more of an offense for our spouse. We take their offenses on ourselves, and that's a lot of love. Now, that response right there, I know the live stream couldn't hear that, but the idea of, if someone offends his wife, he erupts emotionally, and then he has to be able to calm back down in order to continue to hear his wife, instead of going out and committing a murder, which would be bad. But so that's going to be somewhat relevant to what we're going to see tonight, because sometimes our temptation is, if our spouse is experiencing pain, all we want to do is remove the pain. And the same thing, we can do the same thing with our children. Our child's in pain, all we want to do is remove the pain. When in fact, what we have to realize is God uses pain to cause us to grow. So if we remove all pain, we stay weak and immature, arrested development. So finding that balance, we're going to talk more about that. So boundaries are not meant to be a way to control your spouse, but rather a means of regaining self-control. I just wanted to say that again. So if you thought this was the class where you learn how to control your spouse, you're in the wrong class. That one's down the hall, next building. Yeah. This is not going to be effective for that. You can't use this stuff as ammunition. So it's not a means of gaining control over your spouse. It's really, on a serious, and this is actually even better, it's a means of getting self-control, regaining self-control. Okay. So last thing on that part, impure hearts use boundaries to act out feelings such as revenge and anger. So I want to say that again because it's so easy to do. We can use boundaries as a form of revenge. And then lastly, another one I want to point out is the third-party principle. We glossed over it quickly the first week. Third-party principle says sometimes we need to use a third party to help resolve conflict. Sometimes we need a third party to help protect and for protection and support. Use a group for healing and strengthening. Use others to teach you boundaries. Use counselors, friends, or pastors to provide the safe place to work on difficult issues. Use shelters in extreme situations. Sometimes, like the one I'm thinking of is, if it's such a sensitive topic and both parties, one or the other or both, are getting heated, sometimes it's easier just to have a third person there to listen so it helps you stay calm, right? If I'm super angry and then my dad calls, I'm like, oh, hi, Dad, how you doing? Yeah, good. I'm doing great, yes. That tells me I do have control over my emotions, right? So the same effect happens when you have a counselor there. It just helps you stay calm, just a little bit like training wheels on a bicycle, okay? Okay. Now, almost done with this review. And this is a tough one for some of us. It's an act of love to allow our spouse to reap the effects of his or her selfishness or irresponsibility. That's a tough one. I think, if I had to guess, hopefully this is not just my marriage, I think my wife would agree with this. She explains it even better than I do. It's really hard, because a lot of times what happens in a marriage is the wife and children have to suffer for the choices of the husband. Maybe the majority. So if there's consequences to be had, a lot of times the wife and kids are the ones that get a lot of those. It's just the way it's set up. So a wife not wanting to keep having to experience the consequences for her and her children would rather seek to remove the consequences You can see how it would be natural to overfunction, so you don't have, I mean, how hard is it to reap the consequences for someone else's choices? Doesn't that violate your sense of justice? So, rather, an alternative way to handle it is in active love is to allow our spouse to reap the effects of his selfishness. You know, I'm reading this book. It's always like he uses his pronouns, like his or her. Like, it's never just the husband and the wife are both equally capable of doing this particular behavior. He always is very selective. And this one, he's using the pronoun his. As he's saying, it's usually the husbands. I feel like I'm feeling offended here. Because he's saying like the husbands are the ones that are usually selfish and irresponsible. How dare, Kurt?
I just wanted to point out that you're forced to choose your suffering if you're trying to take the suffering away from your spouse. It doesn't belong to you, and maybe you are protecting yourself and your kids, but it's not like you're missing it entirely. You're creating that suffering for yourself, which will also still affect your kids. Choosing your heart.
Choosing your what? Yeah. Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right. Which leads us right into our next set of categories, burden versus load. The word burden, we saw this from Galatians chapter 6, verse 2 and verse 5. Bear one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. And then it says in verse 5, but each one of us must bear our own load. Okay, so this is helpful. The word burden indicates a back-breaking boulder, such as financial, health, or emotional crisis. Spouses actively support each other when one is carrying an overwhelming burden. Spouses actively support each other when one is carrying an overwhelming burden. However, the term load, however, indicates one's daily responsibilities of life. So if we say, if my wife were to say, my husband's not fulfilling his daily responsibilities of life, and she's like, I'm just going to do those for him so I don't have to suffer, she is no longer my wife, she's more of my mom, which means I'm a kid. So she's not, and we're going to see, I'm saying this because we're going to see some more of this tonight. The idea of consequences are good in the sense they allow us to grow up. So the idea of you let me suffer, and then you calmly, patiently, gently, kindly, compassionately tell me, hey, I notice that suffering you're experiencing right now. How's that going for you? You know, I love you so much, and it's hard for me to watch you suffer. Here's an alternative. Let's talk through that. Why do you think that's happening? No. That's like kerosene on the fire. Rebecca? That's funny, yeah. Men don't like the nagging, but because a lot of times we're getting the nagging because we're not taking responsibility. So you're saying, this is my wife, she's hardcore, she really is. She's saying the nagging comes from our immaturity. We're the source of the nagging, not her. Okay, Cliff.
Also, I would agree with your wife because usually when the wife has to become the mother, she's going to remind you of you being a child.
And then you're going to do all these flashbacks.
Yeah, and it's so hard to get out of that category.
Yeah. She doesn't have. She has the choice. She has the choice. No, come on.
Wait, hold on. Oh, I was going to say wives a lot of times have to answer for their husband.
That's how you say it.
Makes it very frustrating.
Wives often have to answer for their husbands, and that makes it very frustrating. My wife is speaking from experience.
So then the wife is like, okay, well then I want to handle everything so I don't have to answer for him.
Yeah. So, we're responsible. As far as handling our own responsibilities, this includes our feelings, our attitudes, our values, and handling of life's everyday difficulties. Spouses may help each other out with loads, but ultimately each person must take care of his own daily responsibilities. Spouses should refuse to rescue or enable the sinful or immature behavior of their partners. Couples have a duty to set limits on each spouse's destructive acts or attitudes. Did you hear that? That's a very strong statement. Somewhat controversial. I'll say it again, this last part. Couples have a duty to set limits on each spouse's destructive acts or attitudes. You have the power to confess, submit, repent of your own hurtful ways in your marriage. If you want your spouse to listen to your boundaries, ask him or her where you may be violating theirs. Is that good? I think it's gold.
You know, it kind of reminds me of, my dad been saying,
Very talkative tonight, Clifford.
my dad been saying lately is, he has regret his relationship with my mom because he never let her have an opinion. He just did things and he ran everything and he never asked her if she liked it. And I think the reason he's thinking of that is he sees
Oh, that's deep. Yeah, it's powerful. Yeah.
so it goes along with what you're saying is if you don't have that communication, you're going to live with regret.
Yeah. It's good. I have to give you a mic next time for the listeners at home. Okay, so I want to wrap up this review. The law of respect states that if we wish for others to respect our boundaries, we need to respect theirs. We can't expect others to cherish our limits if we don't cherish theirs, right? So, in other words, how we initiate this conversation is, hey, are there places where I'm violating your boundaries? Mature adults desire the freedom of others as much as their own. Like, I want the freedom to be able to speak and talk. I want the freedom to be heard. Therefore, I must provide that for my spouse. It cannot be a one-way street. So whatever I want to provide. Okay, so here's those questions from last week. Actually, I want to do this real quickly. These are questions to be asking each other. We had those on a slide. Let's just pull them up real quickly. Thank you, Cam. How might I be crossing your boundaries? Do you feel I respect your right to say no to me? Do I give you guilt messages, withdraw, or attack you when you set a limit? Will you let me know the next time I don't respect your freedom? That's worth the course right there. So you might be surprised. Like, I want to say right now I'm doing really well. I've been saying lately my wife and I are in like another honeymoon period. But like I still would need, if I want that honeymoon period to continue, I would really need to make sure these are emerging. Did you take a picture? Okay. And then lastly, before we start a lesson for tonight, which will be quick, learning to pay attention to your motives does not mean saying yes only when you feel like it or want to do something. This is called, you guys remember? It's a dirty word. Selfishness. Well done, Katie. Learning to pay attention to your motives does not mean saying yes only when you feel like it or want to do something. So boundary, he's trying to say like boundaries is not about, oh, I don't feel like it, therefore I don't have to do it. Like we do want to, love equals self-sacrifice. Yes, Katie, please. Yes. When you say it, what is it in this sentence?
Your spouse's limit or whatever. How do you know it's a boundary and not just like a selfish thing that they're trying to request of you?
That's a great question. It would be really hard to answer that without more specifics, like context. So that, I think honestly the answer there is it has to be batted around, back and forth to discover it. Because either the person, it is a boundary, not selfishness, or it could be selfishness, not a boundary, and the person doesn't even realize it. But if we can't stay calm long enough to have the conversation, so some of these things, that hasn't been stated explicitly is when we have these dialogues with our spouse, it is at times of self-discovery. Like, I'm learning things. I see things one way, and I'm like, I got it figured out, problem solved, do it my way. But then here comes my spouse saying, oh, here's all this other information. I'm like, I don't want all that other information. I've already got it figured out. But like, if I'll import all her information, I'm going to come up with a much better solution that is real life, is beautiful, more holistic. Cliff?
Are you saying that selfishness is usually when you have to have it your way?
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think that's the essence.
Maybe when you're getting upset because it's not going your way?
I think what we're saying about selfishness is just that. It is saying, okay, I'm going to elevate my needs irregardless. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that so much for the public. I wouldn't advise doing that in public for your spouse. So I'm going to see if you're right later on. We'll see. We'll see. I'm going to check my sources, and I'll come back. I'll let you know next week. You can ask me. Huh? Okay, it's going to keep moving. I would say it violates the oneness principle. So, Katie, going into dialogue, like, how is that not selfishness? With a nice tone? Like, so I always say, like, you can say whatever you want to say in a dialogue as long as you do it in the form of a question. You ready? I don't care about it. I'll just say regardless if that's what you want. That's fine. This is more important. You can ask questions. So this is the thing about a healthy marriage. Like, I can say, hey, how is that not selfishness? I genuinely want to know. It's coming off that way, and let me try to give you an understanding of why I think that is. But then in order to initiate that, you have to stop, listen, and assume that your spouse has a good answer.
Yeah, I was trying to look up like the actual definition of what a personal boundary is versus like just being.
So in the book, were you here week one? Okay, in the book, the illustration is a property line. This is where I am, this is where I end, this is where you are, and this is where you end. Like, so he's saying all that to say, I'm responsible for me, and you're responsible for you. It's essentially the idea of taking responsibility. And versus codependency, is how some may say it, versus over-functioning. That's essentially the idea. So I'm responsible for me, and you're responsible for you, but I can't force you to be responsible for yourself, but I can let you experience some consequences for your choices. Of course, experiencing consequences for choices, they need to be ideally clearly communicated ahead of time. But again, like just to wrap up what we were just saying, because it's a great question. I go back to 1 Corinthians 13, it says, love hopes all things, endures all things, seeketh not its own. I import that in to say, hey, I'm going to ask you a hard question with a kind tone, and I want to ask it in such a way that I'm going to imply that you have a good answer. So like, it's the idea of discovery. I'm not punishing you, saying, hey, you're so selfish. Like, I'm not making that declaration dogmatically as if I'm God. I'm saying, I'm genuinely asking, I want to understand, help me understand, because I want to know why this is not selfishness. Generous curiosity is a great way to put it. Generous curiosity. What's your source on that, Kurt? Huh? Good. Generous curiosity. Very good, Kurt. So, wow, no, it's good. I wanted, if you want more follow-up, just let me know, Katie, okay? Very good question. Well done. All right, so we're gonna run through tonight in the remaining time. There's 10 laws, and we're gonna run through the second 5. Next week is really good. I would encourage you to be here. But I will say this, it's the one chapter, it's probably one of the hardest, you're going to hear some of the hardest stuff to hear. So here we are, law 6, the law of evaluation. And I'm going to try to make these really simple. The law of evaluation. It is our responsibility to evaluate the pain our boundaries cause others. Do they cause pain that leads to injury? Or do they cause pain that leads to growth? So so just a quick review. We've had reaction versus response. We've had burden versus load. We mentioned we're going to have reactivity versus proactivity, being reactive and proactive. Here we have pain versus injury. Pain versus injury. This is so good. Pain versus injury. Here's an illustration of it. Megan felt no pain when she shopped extravagantly, yet the marriage was being injured by her impulsiveness and Trent's passivity. She wasn't feeling hurt, but a great deal of harm was being done. When Trent set limits on the credit card, the converse was true. Megan felt a lot of pain, but no great harm was being done. So there was pain, but no injury. Just because someone is in pain doesn't necessarily mean something bad is happening. This is counterintuitive to us Americans, right? I'm going to say it again. Just because someone is in pain doesn't necessarily mean something bad is happening. For instance, you go to a funeral, someone's crying, you just want them to stop crying because it's making you feel uncomfortable. But yet if you do that, you're short-circuiting the grieving process, which is the whole point of the funeral. So this is so helpful in a marriage because sometimes you don't know what to do. Like as far as a husband, like I feel like a lot of times our default response is, I just want to fix it. My wife's in pain. I want the pain to go away. I want to fix it. But what we learn over the course of years in marriage is there are certain things that happen that are outside my control. And at the beginning of my marriage, I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I would feel stress because I want to help my wife, but I feel powerless to do so. And this could result in me experiencing high amplitude. However, it's so emancipating, so freeing to say, look, I'm not God, I don't have to be God. Isn't that good news? I can rather just go with her through the grief. I can go with her through the pain.
That sounds like so much growth. Growth is painful.
But the result of that is you come out the other side with like, we went through something together. You know how they say, these war veterans, they went through all these horrific, traumatic experiences, and they come out of that, World War II, surviving, whatever form of warfare, they almost all died together. And like they get together and they say, no one else understands like my Army buddies, my fellow Marines, or whatever it is, Semper Fi. Same thing is true, like you get that when you go through things together in your marriage. So just because someone is in pain doesn't necessarily mean something bad is happening. Something good might be going on, such as a spouse learning to grow up. And this is the essence of the law of evaluation. We need to evaluate the pain our boundaries cause others. Do they cause pain that leads to injury, or do they cause pain that leads to growth? All he's saying is stop enabling someone else to sin just because it's inconvenient for you or something. Sometimes discomfort is an opportunity for growth. You may need to confront your spouse, give him a warning, or set a consequence. Do not neglect setting limits in your marriage because of a fear of causing pain. Pain can be the best friend your relationship has ever had. So, as far as figuring out what a boundary and a consequence are, it's really helpful to have an outside third party to say, hey, I'm thinking about this. Does that sound like it's vengeance? Does it sound like it's anger? Does it sound like it's healthy? Does it make sense? Because, let's keep moving. So, if I'm going to set something like that with my wife, first of all, it's really hard because my wife is so, I'm going to say, so amazing. I want to give her all kinds of flexibility because love covers a multitude of sins. But if there's something that's bothering me, I'm going to have to confront her with it. I really want to give her a chance to respond. I don't want to just lay it down like, this is how it is. You better do this or else. It's a boundary. I learned it at church. It's like, do you see where I'm coming from, Rebecca? Like, this is what I'm experiencing internally. You may be completely oblivious to this because this is my internal experience, but just so you know, when these things are happening, this is what's going on inside of me. And so I'm thinking that X, Y, and Z. So if you could just do A, B, and C, it would be such a much better outcome for all of us, and we would feel so much closer together. So I want to be thinking about what's best for us. Not just like, I'm not trying to sell my wife on my own selfishness. If I don't want to violate the oneness principle of, I'm thinking about what's in our best interests. Remember, I am we. Me is us. Cliff wants to go again.
Man, I'm sorry, but it sounded like you just said because there was an injury caused, you were able to talk about the pain and get through it.
Wait, say it again.
Because an injury was caused, you were able to talk about the pain and grow through it.
Yeah. Yeah, and even when the pain's coming from, maybe the source of the pain is coming from an action my wife took. I'll say another experience I've had is there'll be sometimes where I just know I'm wrong, but I'm still feeling how I'm feeling, and I just know I'm wrong. So I'm like, I have to confront, because if I don't hear their point of view, I'll never be able to change mine. And it's so refreshing to hear someone else's. So I'm not going into the conversation to punish. I'm going into the conversation intentionally, almost selfishly, to alleviate my own pain, because once I can see where they're coming from, I can oh, that's why. Okay, so all Law 6 is saying is injury, a pain versus injury. Pain can lead to, like going to the gym, you're going to have some pain. If you didn't have any pain, if you didn't have any sweat, you wasted your time. No pain, no gain. That's healthy versus going to the gym and you overdid it. You put way too many plates trying to impress everybody at the gym on the squat rack, and you hurt your back, and you're not going to be back at the gym for like a year. And you're going to atrophy in the meantime, and that's injury. You don't want injury, but pain is good, so you got to know the difference. Okay, got to keep moving. Law 7, law of proactivity. Here it is finally. Law 7, law of proactivity. And we're going to end with law of activity, so those are different. This is a call to solve problems without blowing up. This one's so good, okay? It's so good. You mean you don't have to blow up to solve a problem? I thought it was required. Like if I didn't lose my temper, nothing got done. No, it's not true. So this is called the law of proactivity. Instead of being reactive, where I lose my temper, I can be proactive. What? I don't have to lose my temper. I don't have to wait until we are reacting to others instead of intentionally living out values. Okay, so here's the story. Eric and Judy had been married for 11 years, and they felt their marriage was solid. However, Eric, on the one hand, was sarcastic with Judy when they disagreed. He would lash out in semi-humorous ways to win his point or to show his anger with her. Now, what's really good about being semi-humorous is plausible deniability. You weren't being a jerk. No, I was just joking. Like, you can back up out of it if you need to. Really good, helpful marriage advice. Here's what not to do, okay? So he would lash out in a semi-humorous ways in order to win his point or to show his anger with her, a show of force. Judy, on the other hand, was quiet and compliant. When Eric was sarcastic and hurtful, she would take it silently, attempting not to sink down to her husband's level. But the feelings didn't go away, and they built up for years. This is where I say, this is the idea of love covers a multitude of sins. If it is battery acid wearing on your soul, it has to be communicated. Like there are certain things that I'll say about my wife, bless her heart. Exactly what I was thinking. And again, like I've said before, my wife will leave cups all over the house, especially on her nightstand. And now I look at it as I get to how many cups do I get to collect and take down to the dishwasher this morning? I can't wait. It's going to be amazing. Like, I want to have a tray upstairs in the closet so I can just grab the tray and put them all on so I can just make one trip instead of having just take a few at a time. As I go. And I'm thinking to myself, how does she get all these cups up here? How many trips is she making? Yeah. But the good news is she stays hydrated, which is wonderful, right? So that's something that's pretty easy for me to say, love covers a multitude of sins. But the idea of if I feel belittled or disrespected and she's like, you're weak for having emotions, I would have to stop her and say, Rebecca, I just need you to hear me. Like, I'm struggling right now, and it's not me being weak, it's me being human. And she's like, oh, that's what's going on? Oh, okay. So I can be proactive about that and communicate. So the answer is communication. So when Eric was sarcastic and hurtful, she would take it silently, attempting not to sink down to her husband's level, but the feelings didn't go away, and they built up for years. One night they argued, and Eric needled Judy, as usual. Out of the blue, she exploded in anger. Stop it, stop it, stop it. I'm sick and tired of your immature hatefulness, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. She yelled for a while. Yeah, Rebecca, my wife will be your cheerleader if you need that, okay? She will. She's all about it. Ladies. She yelled for a while and then stopped. They were both in shock, as neither Eric nor Judy had seen this part of her before. Judy felt horrible, as though she were a bad person. Judy had been keeping away from some truths she needed to express, protests against Eric's hurtfulness. These truths finally bubbled over in an intense reaction. Judy's boundaries were reactive boundaries. Had Judy been less compliant long ago, she would have sat down with her husband and said, this is so good, right here. It's as simple as this. Sat down with her husband, calmly, gently, kindly, patiently. Honey, you have a mean side. And it makes me distance myself from you. Now, I don't like that language, like I just said. It makes me. Still a good book, though. Honey, you have a mean side. Now, I wouldn't even want to be that dogmatic, but maybe it needs to happen, so I don't know the context. You have a mean side, and it makes me want to distance myself from you. I love you. I love that. That affirmation is so important. I love you, but I won't subject myself to this treatment. I want you to work on this issue with me so that it doesn't happen again. End quote. This approach is proactive rather than reactive. So like, okay, you're thinking like, okay, there's something I want to communicate. There's something I have to communicate. When is the best time? When is a good time for me where I'm in a good place and they're in the best place possible, and I want to think through my approach. I want to think through my language, and I want to make sure everything gets communicated. That way I don't leave the communication opportunity and like, oh, I should have said that one thing. I left it. Oh, man. So the law of proactivity is taking action to solve problems based on your values, wants, and needs. I'll say it again. The law of proactivity is taking action to solve problems based on your values, wants, and needs. Your values, what do you care about? What are your wants? Not just your needs, but also needs. So the idea of, what was the answer? What action are you taking? Healthy communication. It's amazing. So the law of proactivity is taking action to solve problems based on your values, wants, and needs. Proactive people, here it is, solve problems without having to blow up. Isn't that amazing? They are their boundaries. They are their boundaries, so they don't have to do a boundary as often as reactive folks do. I don't have to lose my temper and blow up. I can calmly communicate it in love to my spouse. Brilliant. So the idea of proactive versus reactive. Proactive people keep their freedom, and they disagree and confront issues all the time. So like we can give up this idea of you have to be a clone of me. We are able to disagree and confront issues all the time. I think it's a test of our maturity in a marriage. So if we can say, now I'm not, it's got to be careful here, because the idea of if you're being a completely immature and irresponsible and careless and selfish, the book is not saying, oh, I just disagree with you, what you're saying. You're calling me out on my selfishness? Oh, I just disagree with that. I need to be able to disagree with you, and end of story. You're not right. That's not what's being said. But, however, the idea of, hey, we can disagree and confront issues all the time, it doesn't mean that we have to go to bed angry. It doesn't mean we have to sleep in separate rooms. Proactive people are able to hold on to the love they have for their spouse, and they do not get caught up in an emotional storm. They have worked through their reactive stage. So what he says in the book is sometimes people who have been bottling things up for so long, they go through this stage of being reactive, like, and he's saying, I feel like the authors are saying, well, at least they're beginning to communicate. But once they move through that stage of being reactive, they can start to calm down and start working on communicating in a healthier way. But some people, I've heard people say like, oh, me and my spouse, we never fight. I would think that would be a Judy and an Eric situation. That would be my default response. Maybe they're just almost less close to being Jesus. Not likely though, right? So maybe someone is just like, okay, I don't want to feel like I'm a bad person if I communicate this negativity, but then it ends up taking its toll anyways. So the idea of we can disagree, we can communicate hard things without having to feel like we're bad, and we can do it in a calm, constructive way. Yes, Rebecca?
I just remembered a story when we were first engaged. I was talking to one of my aunts, and I was like, we never fight. And
You did?
I said that
Really?
about us. We were engaged. Okay. And my aunt said, no, disagreeing with your spouse and having those conversations is very healthy. And I was like, that's what you think.
Well, yeah, you're...
So that was 21 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, because like we're so advanced, we never fight. Okay.
Like, a lot of times when people disagree, people just assume it's a fight, though. But it doesn't have to be a fight.
No, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So disagreeing and fighting don't need to be the same thing. And that's what I'm saying earlier. It really matters on I'm trying to give us tactics, techniques for how to disagree without it turning into a fight. And the ones that I use, and these work in so many different situations, is I want to communicate a lot of times mainly in the form of question, with a healthy tone, a kind tone, expecting they have a good answer for what they're doing. So what it is it's faith seeking understanding. Like, I want to understand where you're coming from. You're doing this. My knee-jerk response is to say, hey, you're being selfish, you're being careless, you're being reckless, you're being immature, you're being whatever. But I'm assuming you have a good reason for that. Could you help explain that to me? Because that's how it's coming off. But I know if you explained it better, then I would probably, I know you must have a good reason, right? What do you mean? But yeah, and it is often true. Like, my wife used to ask me, how are you feeling? And that was the hardest question ever. I have no idea how I'm feeling. I'm so detached from my feelings. I'm fine. And she just wouldn't leave it alone. So it took years. But like if you go into approach, like I'm talking about if there is something there, if there is sin there, if there's selfishness there, if there's immaturity there, you want to approach a person and make it easy as possible for them to admit it. You don't want to do this, you want to come alongside of them. And I like what the Chinese say, like the idea of saving face. Like I never want to humiliate someone without giving them a way out. I wish I could explain that a little better. Like, I want to be able to say, you must have, oh, you did this. You must have done this, right? Oh, you must have just forgot. Okay. Like, I'm not trying to enable them. I'm just trying to make it as easy as possible for them to admit they did something wrong. Yeah, I don't want to shame you. I just want to grow together. I want to be close to you. See the difference? I'm not trying to shame you. I'm not trying to punish you. I just want us to get this worked out because I want us to be tight. I want that to be the motivation. I love you. I care about you so much, and I care about our relationship so much. I feel like this is coming between us. I want to solve it. I just want to talk about it. Here's how I'm taking it. I want you to tell me how your experience and your perspective so that we can come together on this. Okay. So sometimes you have to work through some things and get used to communicating. Because I know sometimes people have had such horrific things happen to them in their childhood, and you ask them about it, and it's been, I'm fine. Oh, that's fine. It was no big deal. And there's sometimes where I've seen people where like they need to grieve, but they can't even, they haven't yet, I don't want to say it derogatorily, like they can't even, they haven't got to the place where they can even admit it was a problem yet. So it's just like, it's so far suppressed. Your soul knows it's there, completely aware, but your consciousness is not aware because it's been suppressed so much. So just the idea of bringing things to the surface, I say to sometimes people in counseling, like it may be very appropriate for you to rage. Like, because the alternative is like, I'm just going through life and I'm numb. I have no feeling on it. Everything's fine. I'm fine. You're fine. The world's fine. But like you become like a shell of a person, and like that growth gets placed on pause because like you've just been suppressing, and suppressing a lot of times ends in a medical diagnosis is what's being said oftentimes. We said that before. Okay, so you may be stuck in protest, constantly griping and challenging things you don't like. You are I skipped ahead. Okay, so this law applies to different people at different points of growth. Okay? You may have yet to experience your first tantrum. That's a possibility. You may have that's what we just described. You may have a season of reactive boundaries ahead of you. Find some caring, safe people to help you navigate through it. Your spouse may not be the person for this. Like if you say, I've been suppressing things for so long and I'm finally going to emote, it's possible your marriage is in a fragile state where if you begin to just erupt, you could destroy your marriage. But yet, those feelings need to outlive their usefulness by being communicated, expressed in the presence of empathetic witness. So sometimes that's why calling a friend, not a friend who's just going to help you vent and say, yeah, you should divorce your husband or wife, they're so terrible. Yeah, let's go get wasted together and then complain about your spouse the whole night. Like, I'm not talking about that. But someone like a biblical counselor, of course, is what I'm going to think about. So that may be, where you're at. Or you may be stuck in protest, constantly griping and challenging things you don't like. You are defined by what you hate more than what you love. You may need to accept some sad realities. And this next word I think is so important. Accept some sad realities, grieve, and get in touch with things important to you so that you can integrate positive values along with your protests. Work on setting proactive boundaries in your marriage. Deliberate boundaries built on love and based on your values. So the idea is, and I just think it's a great point. Like he's going off on these subtle points, and he's just glossing over them real quickly, but that's a whole book right there. There's a brilliant book. I forget the title of it now. We have it in the books in the library. It's called The Grieving Process, whatever. Remember the title of that book? Amber, you've read it? I know. The Grief Recovery Handbook. Yes, thank you, Rebecca. Where you come from?
She's in the front row for a reason.
Yeah, that's what a help. So the idea of sometimes we've experienced some traumatic things and we need to grieve them, which means we need to go through a season of sadness so that the emotions of a sadness can outlive their usefulness, because if we don't, we're just, suppressing it, repressing it, then it has a tendency to be misplaced aggression sometimes. That's what he's saying. So work on setting proactive boundaries. Now, moving quickly, Law 8. Law 8. The law of envy. And I'm just going to tell you my take on this very quickly and move on to Law 9. This law addresses the most powerful obstacle to setting boundaries in marriage. Envy. Like, how so? It was somewhat confusing. We will never get what we want if we focus outside of our boundaries on what others have. So here's the way I look at it. I list out like 7 or 8 bullet points here. My spouse's opinion is the one that matters. My spouse's happiness is more important than my own. My spouse is the powerful one in our marriage. My spouse is the one who gets to be decisive and take charge. My spouse can say no to me, but I can't say no to them. My spouse's feelings are the ones that matter. My spouse gets to be carefree while I have to take on all the adulting. What's so funny, Cliff?
My wife's reaction, that was hilarious.
Did you get any elbows?
No.
Okay.
It's like, no. It's like, yep.
So that's how I'm, like, I think what Law 8 is saying is, my spouse can be carefree while I have to take on all the responsibility. I'm envious. I wish I could be the powerful one. I wish I could have a voice. I wish my opinions mattered. I think that's what's being said here. So you can't set limits in marriage until you are looking at yourself as part of the problem and as a great deal of the solution. Work through envy, own your problems, and take action. So in some senses, the envy can be like, okay, I'm just giving myself an excuse to not have to take action. I'm just complaining, having this internal dialogue of complaining when I actually need to step up and I need to exercise some power. Or I need to communicate that, hey, this is, it seems like your happiness is what matters in our home because of all these things. Like, I just feel like genuinely you don't care about me because of these things. You know I care about them, and yet you just dismiss them. So it's like, wow, I felt like I communicated well. Maybe I can have some power. Maybe I can, like, there's something I can do. I think that's what's being said on law number 8, law of envy. Yeah. Cool, good. Thank you. Guys, you guys are so encouraging. Steve. Yeah. Yes. It's good. Law 8, law of envy, has a connection to law 6, Steve's pointing out. Law of evaluation. Taking responsibility. All right, so law 9, law of activity. It is our responsibility to take the initiative to solve our problems rather than being passive. Taking initiative increases one's chances to learn from mistakes. That's the law. So now we'll flesh it out just a little bit. Have you ever noticed how some couples are divided into the active spouse and the passive one? Rebecca, quit shaking your head, please. Oh, other couples, not us. Okay. She was just shaking her head way too much. Like, yeah. Okay, yeah, Cliff. Okay, I'm sorry. You go ahead and shake your head. You're allowed to shake your head. I don't want to tell you not to. Go ahead. I'm fine with it. Thanks for working through. Yeah, good stuff. One spouse takes more initiative, sets goals, confronts problems. You know the good one, the spouse that's the good one. The other waits for his spouse. Notice how he says his? I'm telling you. He's being very selective with his pronouns in this book. The other waits for, I want to say their spouse, but it says his spouse, to make a move first, then responds. Active people make lots of mistakes, and wise ones grow from them. Hebrews 5:14. They try something, experience a limit, and adapt. Passive people have trouble learning because they are afraid to take risks. Because of this, they also have a harder time taking charge of their lives and boundaries. God is not pleased with those who shrink back in passivity. And he quotes Hebrews 10:38, and I'll give you two translations. Hebrews 10:38. But my righteous one will live by faith. My soul takes no pleasure in anyone who shrinks back. Another translation says, but my righteous one will live by faith, and if he hesitates, my soul will not delight in him.
That's in this, he's quoting those passages.
Yeah,
So it sounds like he knows the Bible, maybe because he read how Adam didn't take responsibility.
yeah,
That's why he's saying.
yeah, exactly right. Now you're reading canonically. Well done. People are passive for different reasons, however. Some fear losing love. Others don't see their lives as their problem. Still others fear making mistakes. Hey, yeah, my life is your problem, not mine. Some can simply be lazy, but the result is always the same. Their problems get worse. Evil thrives when no one sets limits on it. That is why friends and families stage interventions for alcoholics in denial. The problem doesn't go away without action. According to Edmund Burke, all that is needed for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Doing nothing or being passive stunts boundary development and growth in marriage. When one spouse is active and the other passive, several problems can occur. The active spouse may dominate the passive one. The active spouse may feel abandoned by the passive one. The passive spouse may become too dependent on the active one's initiative. The passive spouse may resent the power of the active one. And then finally, the passive spouse may be too intimidated by the active one to say no. So don't wait for your spouse to take the first step. Assume the first move is always going to be yours. If you tend to be the passive spouse, let your mate know how risky it is for you to take initiative and ask her to help you become more active. That's really good language. That's really good language. So I'll say it again then. Clifford? Assume the first move is always going to be yours. Like instead of like making a move, do something about it, we could just complain to all our buddies at work about how terrible our wife is. Right? I would never do that to you, Rebecca. It's way more fun. No. But listen to this language, though. Let your mate know, hey, this feels really risky, but I think it's the right thing to do, so please hear me. You can let your mate know how risky it is for you to take initiative, ask for help to become more active. You may be wondering just how the law of proactivity differs from the law of activity. The difference is that the law of proactivity has to do with taking action based on deliberate, thought-out values versus emotional reactions. I'll say it again in a moment. The law of activity has to do with taking the initiative versus being passive and waiting for someone else to make the first move. Let me say that again. That's worth the whole night. Let's say it again. What's the difference between law of proactivity and law of activity? The difference is that the law of proactivity has to do with taking action based on deliberate, thought-out values versus emotional reactions. The idea of, hey, I want to think through how I should solve this and then want to proactively seek to communicate this with my spouse versus I just wait till I blow up and then I communicate in a way that's destructive. Law of activity has to do with taking the initiative versus being passive and waiting for someone else to make the first move. Your spouse may have no idea. We learned in Gottman, your spouse cannot be expected to read minds. So it's possible your spouse has no idea, just doesn't know that you leaving your clothes on the bathroom floor every time you take a shower is annoying. They may have no idea. Maybe normal for them, where they came from. Yeah, Tannen, sorry, please. You said no? You don't? Hey, you have not got enough. If you don't talk, then Cliff's going to say something. So, wait, what?
If you express to your spouse those things, but they don't take the initiative to do that, you know what I mean? If you're taking the initiative, telling them, but then they still don't.
So what would the next step be based off what we learned? Is we got to figure out. Well, that's something where, like, okay, I feel like I'm helping her bear her burden because she's doing all these other things. But it was all an honor to help her bear a load. Okay, maybe it is a load, but I enjoy it. So, do you want to answer that since you're the one leaving the cups all over the place? Here's how I look at it. Yeah, okay, we can say it's her personal responsibility, but she's already doing so much for so many other people.
That's not like that's something we had to fight about. It's not like you're like, you better pick up these cups, it's so annoying. I don't think I've ever even said it that. So that's different. If you said that and I kept doing that, then I'm, being
But if I said that based off what I know about how you're spending all your time, it would feel so petty to me.
Yeah, that's something that like it doesn't bother him,
yeah.
but he just notices it.
Yeah, but so it's different if it's something that you're asking your spouse to do.
I should bring a video next week. I'll do a compilation video of every day this next week of the cups I find, and I'll put them all together. It'll be so fun. We need to flesh that out in our next get-together, because that's really the challenge of the book. So clear. I think the default answer is clearly communicate that to the spouse in the ways that have been described, and then wait for an answer. And then respond to that, and then back and forth. Which we've done recently, and I thought that was so good. Okay, Katie and then Cliff. And we only have one more law, and we're done for tonight. And I have handouts for your questions, your homework for the week, okay? Katie.
In the women's group where we learned all these steps and ladders and stuff, one of them was to
Ladder of integrity.
fight.
Clean fight. Fight clean.
And, yeah, like,
Let's have a clean fight out there.
the little handout that I can remember at the bottom says that if you guys are going back and forth more than 3 or 4 times, then you need to bring somebody else to help solve the problem.
Yeah, a lot of times that's true. But sometimes the situation is so complex, it really does take that back and forth to really get down to what's actually happening. Versus it'd be way easier on the first back and forth to say, oh, here's the solution, problem solved.
There can be a back and forth, step forward, but if you're back and forth and you're moving.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like, wow, I had no idea. You're feeling a sense of enlightenment.
Yeah, essentially it's saying if the clean fight is not being resolved,
Yeah,
somebody else into it to help maybe resolve it. So that way it's not like a burden that you're bearing.
yeah, that's good. I'm proud of you both for what you just said. It's like I feel like it's so good. You're equipped to help other people too. Clifford?
I find sometimes when me and Amber can't get past some certain understandings that are only in the third party, sometimes it's you, sometimes it's Diane Scott. Sometimes you will say exactly what my wife says to me, and it makes sense, and I'm like, oh, I get it now. I couldn't hear it from her, but somehow I could hear it from
Yeah.
her.
Third party definitely has this.
I'm saying something, and then Diane Scott says it to Amber, and she understands it perfectly. And Diane Scott will say word for word what I said, and I'm like, how did you not understand it from when I say it, but you can understand it with Diane Scott? It's just sometimes they need to hear from somebody else.
That's so true. Like I have the same thing. I sometimes I'll say, wow, I wish I could. If this was someone else coming to you with this issue, I'd know exactly what to do. But because it's me, I'm emotionally involved, and I'm not able to think as clearly.
Yes, that's so true. It's like you're in quicksand
Yeah, it's like, why is this so confusing? I never have a sense of confusion when it comes to other people's things, like, but now I'm having a sense of confusion for my own. Why? Because that emotional experience, it affects your rational thinking. It's frustrating. So you can think, oh, I'm just, I'm unintelligent, or no, it's just you're human. Law 10, the law of exposure, last one. What boundaries, excuse me. Law 10, the law of exposure. Exposure, like exposure therapy, right? It is our responsibility to communicate our boundaries to each other. When boundaries are exposed, two souls can be connected in the marriage. What? Are we not? Well, that's too explicit. I don't follow. Two people are exposed. I am thinking of Adam and Eve were naked in the garden and were not ashamed idea. When boundaries are exposed, two souls can be connected in the marriage. You want to share? Kurt, you dying to share?
Because you're telling your partner something that violates you and therefore causes you pain. So you're, in a sense, setting it out there and telling them, hey, you could do as you wish, however, this affects me. So you're being vulnerable, you're exposing your vulnerability, you're turning yourself up, and you're
Yeah.
saying, look, I might have to make different choices if you hurt me this way, but this is how I am being hurt.
Being what? So I do think that's appropriate. The exposure and vulnerability, lining those up as synonyms. Spouses need to make clear what they do or don't want. Spouses need to make clear what they do or don't want. They need to work on understanding what their spouse is saying about their boundaries. When boundaries are exposed, two souls can be connected in the marriage. But when boundaries are unexposed, spouses are less emotionally present in the marriage and love struggles. I want to explain this, illustrate this from the story from the book in just a moment. Take, for example, I think Gottman would say, like, this is the idea of not expecting your spouse to be able to read your mind. So spouses need to make clear what they do or don't want. So you're exposing what you're thinking, like communicating, giving them an opportunity to understand you, which is wonderful. So take, for example, the husband who withdraws when his wife's self-centeredness wounds him. He might say, I'm having a hard time with the demands on my job. Her response might be, well, if you're a real man, you wouldn't have any problem at your job. Because my dad never did. You see, I directed my attention, and then I had a dramatic pause. Rebecca, you're a very strong individual. It's funny to laugh. Indication of how far we've come. Let me just, pick up momentum again. I'm having a hard time with the demands of my job, end quote. Her response might be, quote, do you think I have it easy with the kids? End quote. Now, he feels, this is good, like this is pretty real life, isn't it? He feels negated and unloved, and she may not even be aware that she has ignored his feelings or viewpoint. Then, as the dance continues, the husband isolates and hides his feelings from her. This is definitely me at times in the past. For sure. This is like, for sure me. He feels negated and unloved, and she may not even be aware that she has ignored his feelings or viewpoint. Then, as the dance continues, the husband isolates. What do we call that? We call that stonewalling. And hides his feelings from her. He thinks, what's the use? she'll only put me down and talk about herself again anyway. She loses the connection with him and doesn't know why. And she is cheated out on an opportunity to respond to the truth and thereby start maturing in her character. Far better for the husband to let his wife know, honey, when I tell you my negative feelings, it hurts me that you become critical of me and focus the issue on yourself. This makes me withdraw from you. Again, I don't like the language of this makes me. I'm choosing to withdraw. It's not like you made me withdraw. I don't like the language. This makes me withdraw from you. I want and need to be close to you. And I will work toward this. But if you continue to negate me instead of hear me, I may need to distance somewhat and take those deeper feelings to friends who will try to understand me. Now, that's the implementation of a boundary. What I would want to do before I'd ever get there would be something like, why is that? Before I want to say, because that can come off as an ultimatum if we're not careful. What I would want to say is, why is that? Why not just hear me? And again, putting it in the form of a question, assuming my wife has a good answer, why wouldn't you just want to hear me? And then see what she says. So I think down the road, you're like, hey, if this, it's not wrong for me to need to share my heart. And if you keep shutting me down, I'll find other people to do it. Now, what we know is this can lead to adultery. Just so we're clear on this. Like, if a man can't share his heart with his woman and he's finding other people, he really needs to be careful that he's doing it with men, not women, for one. Because as soon as you share your heart with another woman and she shares her heart, that is an emotional attachment, which can lead to an emotional affair, which leads to a physical affair. And the physical affair isn't a reflection of the emotional affair. We have to have boundaries. Now, towards the end of the book, it's going to talk about that, the idea of forsaking all others, what that means. Really good section. We have to have those clear. So when you go to weddings from now on, I want you to listen for this language. Make sure you hear in the vows, forsaking all others. Because that is not, it's not just always automatic. It's not, you think, well, of course forsaking all others. That was normal for me growing up. It may not be normal for your spouse or the people who are doing their vows. It didn't even come to mind. But it ends up, if that's not, and you can see where if someone wasn't reminded of that or counseled into that, I'm not trying to say they're terrible people. They just didn't think of it. But if you don't talk through that in your engagement, it will emerge at some point. That chapter's coming up down the road. Okay. We're going to wrap this up. Far better for the husband to let his wife know. I'll say it again. Honey, when I tell you my negative feelings, it hurts me that you become critical of me and focus the issue on yourself. Okay. When your spouse tells you what they need, it is a bid for connection. It is the desire for an authentic love with depth. Okay. Do you see that? Again, that was worth the cost the whole night right there. This is true with husband and wife. This is true with parents and children. This is true with your buddies. This is true with your mom and dad. This is true. This is just true. So here's what's happening. When someone communicates to you, hey, I experienced pain as a result of this experience or an event or, choice on your part, whatever. The temptation is to go on the defensive. And if you go on the defensive, what do you want to do? You want to defend yourself. Now, if you start to defend yourself, does the other person feel seen, known, and understood? No. And because they don't feel seen, known, and understood, they say, okay, I'm going to try it again. And then you're like, wow, and then you respond like, wow, they're just trying to attack me. They just won't let it go. And then you become more defensive. And they're like, I'm still not being heard. Let me try this again. And I don't know what, and then you could respond with look at all the good things I've done. What about all the, why are you keying in on, and you see it just escalates. This is a tough one to change, but to throw that defensiveness out and respond with, this is a person who's coming to me, telling me things because they care about me. They love me. They want me in their life, and they want a relationship that is authentic. They want a relationship where we don't just sweep things under the rug and everything's just make-believe and pretend. It's a bid for connection, like authentic connection. Now, can you see how that would come across as counterintuitive? And if in our defensiveness, we just lash out, and you can see how that would spiral quickly. So, an alternative is, if we can understand that it's a bid for connection, it's a desire for an authentic love with depth, then we would want to make it as easy as possible for our spouse to come to us. It is a real joy in marriage to get to the point where you don't have to get angry in order to tell your spouse the truth. We learn to speak and hear the truth in love. So I want to have the courage to speak the truth, but not just the truth. I want to speak the truth in love. And I don't want to speak the truth in anger, because you can tell the truth, but the anger's there. It's not going to be heard. And not only do we want to speak the truth in love, we want to hear the truth in love. Like, I don't have to get defensive. I want to I want to understand you. I want to understand what your soul. I want to when you can respond that way, like, you really get to know this person you're married to. Like, where are they coming from? It's not just they're being mean. It's not just they're being hurtful. They're sharing their heart. Okay. Any questions from tonight? You guys already asked a bunch of good questions. So Steve and then Kurt.
Not really a question, more, so when earlier there was a quote saying that you do this, it makes me do this.
Yeah. Yep. Twice.
He said, like, you do this, I don't know how to respond other than to do this.
Yeah. So that right there, it's worth crafting. Like, thinking through, like, how am I going to communicate this? And like, you'll come up with different language. Like, so what I want to do in my marriage, because you did this, I feel like doing this. So what I'll say in my marriage, because I want to be the spiritual leader, so that means I have to take responsibility. So I want to say something like, I'm tempted to respond this way. So what I'm saying is, this is not a good response, but this is what's going on inside of me. So this may be, my immaturity, and this may be my weakness, but like, I want to share this with you. I want to grow in this way, but is there anything you can do to help me as I'm seeking to grow? Because my default response is to lash out in anger. My default response is to walk away and stonewall you and withhold affection. So, and I hope you'll appreciate the fact that I'm trying to come to you and communicate. It is very challenging for me, because I don't want to, as a man, it feels like I'm being weak, and I don't like that feeling. What? Yes, that's humility. I am struggling right now. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm struggling, and this is how it comes off to me. And I know I love you. I want you to know I love you so much, and I know you love me. So can you help explain that to me? I want to understand your perspective. And they may say, wow, I was just careless. I didn't realize it was affecting you like that. I appreciate you sharing your perspective. I can automatically change. Or they may say, hey, here's what I need you to understand. I appreciate you're going through all that, but here's the reality of it. Like, from my perspective anyway, is this is why I'm doing it, and I think it's a pretty good reason. So please don't make it about you and all this stuff. It's just what needs to happen. So like, it's just, either way, it's healthy. Any follow-up on that, Steve? I think you'll craft your own good language. I think you understand the concept very well. So well done. Good. It's also helpful to have brothers, older, wiser brothers, younger, wiser brothers, to help. Hey, I'm trying to communicate this. Can you help me? What language do you use? Because we all have the same struggles, don't we? Kurt?
So I'm reading Terry Reel's book, Us, right now. It's really good. It's like comparing a lot of the foundations of marriage. But he talks about accepting this dynamic
Core negative what?
Core negative
Image.
image. So it's like a cartoonish caricature of you at your worst. And then your spouse will go to that.
Why are you laughing again?
See, it's just narcissist. Why does it? That's what narcissists do.
So, what do we do?
So what you do is there's this ladder that you or your spouse, whoever is in that accusatory mode, will climb. So it starts with a vent. Well, you forgot to, switch the laundry over. Well, you always forget to switch the laundry over, so now it goes to trend. That's the next one. And then it goes to characterological character, which is, and that's because you're selfish, or, you only think about yourself. So they're escalating this ladder, and what Terry says is that instead of you going back into your child self and defending yourself and fighting back and being defensive, go into your adult mind, your prefrontal cortex,
Yeah.
and climb the ladder with them and say, you're right, I did forget to switch my laundry over. And you're also right, I've done it before. And you're also probably right, this is a reflection of my selfishness and my contentedness. Just climb the ladder with them,
And then?
and even if they make a demand on you, then say, okay, I will seek this out. And most of the time, your partner will climb back down the ladder because you've met them at every single point. That's because your wise mind, your wise adult mind, is seeking to repair that connection instead of repair it.
Yeah. So it just sounds like you're saying, hey, when your spouse is communicating something like this, they would need to feel seen, known, understood. So, yeah, because for your spouse, if your spouse is communicating to you your own immaturity, it's very mature to help them feel seen, known, understood. So, yeah, it kind of wrecks the image. So, yeah, it's good. I want to ask two guys to help hand out the handouts for tonight. I have a review for you to take home and the questions for this week.
Well, I thought you were gonna ask the two guys, right? I thought you had somebody in mind.
One each. Double-sided. But hey, these are great conversations. Like on the questions are going to review laws 6 through 10. You might want to read through and just circle one that really stood out to you. Some of the questions would be like, yeah, that doesn't really get any traction with me. Another one might be like, wow, that's exactly us. And it can be a conversation, an opportunity to practice some of these. Or it might be like an opportunity to say, remember when we used to struggle with this?
What did you say?
All right, it's 8:34. We'll call it a night. I appreciate everybody's attention, your attendance. Thank you for being here. And be back next week for week 4. I want to say one more thing. 1 second.